Hey, everybody. It's John Leichel. For those who don't know me, I am the host here at the Strega Mystica podcast. And, as an anthropologist, my work is always centered on the question of the human being in relation to the sacred, or maybe in a way that's more relevant to our audience, the self in relationship to the occult. And, at the heart of that mystery lies the concept of sacred text, the grammar of the divine, if you will. And that's where we get the word grimoire. So today we have an author that is a good friend of the show and a good friend of me personally, who's guiding us not just through the history of these grimoires, these potent manuals, but into a living, working relationship with them. Dee Norman is here to discuss her book, A Seeker's Guide to Grimoire Magic, Unlocking the Secrets from Old Texts. This book is absolutely incredible. I've so enjoyed it. And in it, Dee challenges the notion that these foundational texts are too difficult and dangerous and complicated and steeped in symbolism that may or may not be relatable to the person who might pick it up. And instead, what Dee offers, and I'll stop speaking as though she's not here in a minute, but I couldn't figure out how to just put me on the screen. Just full disclosure, I'm figuring out this new software. But what she offers is what makes any magical book magic, is fundamentally the dedication of the person who's wielding it. And so, Dee, I want to welcome you and correct me on anything that I might have missed or misspoken about the intention and the topic of the book.
It is my pleasure to be here, first of all, and you were spot on. This is throwing the gate open wide on textual magic, grimoire magic, and from other written sources that a lot of people don't feel welcome to when it comes to magical uh, research, or they get the direct message from people in some cases that that's not their kind of magic. So the whole purpose of the book is to kind of open the door and invite people who might normally not, like, be very curious but might not normally be comfortable delving into those kinds of texts, to delve in and modernize the practices.
Now, for those who might be seeing you for the first time, on the show, tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you into the work that you do with the occult and your own personal practice.
So it all started with my family. My family is Italian American, which is how we met. And my very first book was Burn a Black Candle, which is a book that talks about my family's folk magical practices. And thanks to my family's folk magical practices, I got my first tarot deck at the age of 11. And that was what I call my gateway drug to the occult. That is what introduced me to a bunch of esoteric concepts that weren't necessarily my family's, but which fascinated me. So I've been studying this stuff forever, and it is my life's passion. And I particularly, when I was younger, was obsessed. I wanted to get my hands on these fascinating old texts, and couldn't, of course, when I was younger, because access to texts like that was limited. So that's how I got here, is that once the internet opened up our ability to look at old texts and have access to them, and the esoteric publishing industry caught up with providing us with more and more grimoires, I got my hands on what I wanted to get my hands on, and it went from there. And I'm sorry if you hear apparently my dog is having some kind of problem in the other room. I hope you don't hear it.
Your dog just wants to be on the show. That's cool. We like dogs here. So I want to dive in, if that's okay with you, with so I've got so many questions. I don't know how many we'll get to. We try to keep these to 30 minutes. They usually end up never being that short. I have to take full responsibility for that. But you talk about the magician as the vessel, and I was really impressed that you had Lon Milo Duquette stating in your forward that the only thing, I've got the quote here somewhere, the only thing that a magician can really change, or a magical practitioner can really change, is the magician themselves, the practitioner themselves. And so that like really jumped out to me, given my background in theological anthropology, my years of practice as an esoteric practitioner, the study of the nature of humanity in relationship to source or the divine. So tell me how your book's approach to grimoires ultimately functions as a path of self transformation and spiritual mutation, if you will, as opposed to, like, let's say a manual for external results, that where you're calling on this entity or that entity or the or things that are outside of yourself, while you clearly understand that what we change is we change ourselves, and when we change ourselves, we change our experience.
Well, I'll start off with another quote from Mr. Duquette, which I think was a subtitle of one of his books, is "It's all in your head. You just don't know how big your head is." Which I love that quote, because to me, when I was younger, it used to disappoint me when people would say it's all internal to the magician. And I would think, well, what's the point in that? If I could only change so much, if I'm only changing what's in myself. But as I have played and tinkered with magic throughout the course of my life, I've learned that no, that's where the significant changes happen. Your perceptions, your understanding of yourself, and your understanding of the world around you, which is still internal. How you understand the world around you is part of you, plays a major role in what is happening in your life. And so it's interesting if you look at the true grimoires that I talk about. So if the academics consider the definition of grimoire much more narrow than what we just average speakers say. When we say grimoire, we mean any magic book. Academics mean books that were specifically written for the summoning and control of various entities. This is the narrow definition. And most of those older texts that so focus around that is you are summoning and subduing these demons, spirits, or entities. And it's a perfection, it's an internal perfection process that as you subdue each one, you are coming closer and closer to your idea of the divine, which is this turns into this beautiful and complex process that addresses multiple facets of your personality and your perception as you work through hierarchies of spirits that are very, very extensive. So, even in the oldest magical texts, we have this idea of working with and subduing or controlling our quote inner demons.
Yeah, that I really love that. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the idea there, which really transcends our practice as esotericists, but looks at all of the mystical traditions across the world, is that in one way of working with these spirits, entities, demons and saints and all of that, is that you're actually working with the archetype that they represent, not
Correct.
making a judgment of whether they were a physical being or a non-physical being, because it's all the same stuff. If it starts in our head, it's real. And I thought, there's so much in your book. I'm getting ahead of myself, but so much in your book that I think is applicable not just to the esoteric practitioner, but to anybody who's looking to really kind of shore up their personal development, self-realization, self-actualization, and all of that. So I just wanted to note that I really appreciate that, and I want to kind of move into you, because you completely answered my next question that I had planned, which was to talk about that distinction between what pop culture might consider a grimoire and what a grimoire to the academic community actually is. So I'm gonna talk for a second or two about gatekeeping and access, because you talk in the book about dealing with skepticism from peers who insisted that the older sources, that the legit grimoires, were too complex or they were dangerous. And was this feeling of feeling excluded from traditional esoteric organizations or knowledge a catalyst for writing the book? And is that why you so clearly say this book is for you, to all seekers, to kind of, balance that back out?
Yeah. Yeah. This is where I get teary-eyed. So I have been fascinated with these books and with esoteric concepts and esoteric organizations since I was about 14 or 15 years old. And it was life dream to get my hands on these books, to join these organizations, and the harsh realizations as I grew older that no, I'll never be a member of the Freemasons because there's something in the way of me becoming a Freemason. I'm lacking something. Um, and also with the esoteric organizations that I have joined, the treatment I've received in some of them that were supposed to acknowledge the equality and strength of women, and that don't. And also the reactions from my peers when I started talking about in the early days, in ye olden times, like the 90s, um, people saying grimoires are too evil, grimoires are too Christian. Make up your mind. Are they too evil or are they too Christian? That's not the kind of magic for you, because I look like a little crazy goth girl of the 90s and I was very young. And, these explicit and implicit messages that I received. And then when I started thinking about it when I got older, I'm like, oh, yeah, these texts were written for elite white dudes in most cases. And that you'd start taking into consideration literacy levels throughout history, and how for most people who weren't upper class and well educated, there were specific gates put in place to keep this information secret. And explicitly mentioned in, like, for example, the book of Abramelin, where they talk about people who are suitable to do the work of this grimoire, and women are mentioned, and that the only women that are suitable to do the work of the grimoire are virgins. But it also points out that virgins and women in general are highly untrustworthy, so why would you ever commit this important information to their keeping? So there's a lot of hurdles, and I think that not just women, but people who just don't fit the mold are often told this message over and over again, that this learned magic, is what academics call it, is not for you. And I just wanted to tell people, oh, hell yes, it's for you. This is 100% for you. If you want it, it's like Sophia is ready for anyone. Wisdom is ready for anyone who seeks it. And if you're seeking it in the pages of a book, it's ready for you there too. You don't have to wonder if you fit the mold, because there is no mold.
That's so powerful. And if we really think about it, in those older times, it was the women who were doing the work, the healing work, the midwifery, the work of the doula, the death doula, and the healing in their villages. And if it weren't for them passing down their wisdom, their experiences, their formulas, if you will, and some of those learned white dudes, um, fortunately saying, oh, there might be something here. She really does affect a change in a person's health. Let's study that. We wouldn't have medicine. And when
Exactly.
medicine was first, quote unquote medicine was first being practiced and being accepted by the cis male population, the educated white elites, then it was condemned by churches. It was condemned looked at as superstition, even by the populace.
Right.
And so we really owe a debt of gratitude to the women who kept these grimoires, because it wasn't until the early 19th century, I think, that we start to see men recording these things. Women have been recording these things and passing them down, and the ones who couldn't write, by oral tradition, since time immemorial.
It's
So
interesting because there is that strong oral tradition, but because of the literacy rates, if you don't get it on paper, somehow people think it doesn't exist.
and it's
Um,
easier to hide.
but another aspect that's fascinating is that since brewery and perfumery were women's occupations for the longest time. There's alchemical texts that are titled things like doing the women's work, because alchemy was so closely tied to those practices. And there were authors who at least claimed to be women in the authoring of alchemical texts because they thought it actually provided more veracity, more validity to associate an alchemical text with a woman's name, because it was a women's work. So I find that really interesting. And there are historically a few famous court alchemists that were women. So
Yeah.
you can find these little highlights in history, but it's hard sometimes to find. And there's not a lot of, for young esotericists, not a lot of female, not a lot of female role models.
Yeah, and that's why I think your book is so valuable, even in the 21st century, because we can lose sight of that. You just mentioned, authenticity and validation, and in the book, you draw a critical distinction, saying that I'm going to paraphrase it roughly, that the validity means something that is factually sound, that it's logical. Authenticity means something is real or true, and perhaps implies that there's an approved framework that the
Mhm.
establishment recognizes. So for an occultist or esotericist that's working in their way, in their world, in their practice and tradition, to make the old new and make the find relevance in some of the older traditions. How do we navigate the between our need for a technique to be valid, producing valid results, and the pressure to adhere to a lineage's idea of authentic practice? This is a hot button for me. So
It's a hot button for me too. And despite having grown up in a family tradition, or maybe because mom and grandma were real practical and they worried about what worked. They weren't really concerned about, they weren't looking back to make sure that their ancestors had done it exactly the same way that they're doing it, or that they're doing it the right way. They're trying to figure out, because we used it as a practical tool to run our household. Our esoteric life was woven completely in with our practical lives. And I've grown up the same way, in that I love history and I love going back and discovering the secrets and the information about how things were done. But I'm also perfectly ready to throw that out the window if it's not going to suit my modern practice, and just take what works for me. So, people will ask me from the stuff that I've written in my previous books, like, oh, is it valid if I exchange this component for that component in a spell? And I'm like, does it work? Because I don't
yeah,
care what you use if it works, because our tools are just that, they are tools. They support what goes on up here and in our souls. And that's what does the magic. Our brains and our souls and our hearts and our minds, that does the magic. The symbolism, the tools, the techniques that we externally use are tools to support that magic. And you got to use what works for you. And
yeah. We had a couple weeks ago, we had another mutual friend of ours, Mary Grace Farron, on,
yay.
and we talked about how for us in our family traditions, it wasn't called magic, it wasn't called witchcraft, it wasn't we weren't concerned with putting a label on it, because it was our worldview. So if it's your worldview, there is no need for a label. And if it's your worldview, that just tells us, from my perspective, that it's an inside job, that
Right.
that you do what you got to do, how you got to do it. I mean, some of these practices actually came out of necessity, during periods of war or famine
Yeah.
or strife of some kind. You did what you could do with what you've got. So our practice was kind of like the I like to say, like the pasta vazul of esotericism, because we took what we had and we made that work, because we understood that it was all going to be an inside job. If anybody that's watching, and we've had some folks commenting throughout, and I've been trying to stay on touch to put them on the screen. If anyone has a question for Dee, please go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll get it up on the screen, and then we'll start this conversation with all of us and expand the conversation. That's the idea behind this podcast. So I think next, you talk about what do you call it? The magic of concealment and language, and you talk about how ciphers explore how magical text is designed to conceal as much as it reveals, so that the initiated actually understand at a different level. How important, how vital is the act of decoding those obscure languages and sigils and ciphers when in relationship to the efficacy of your magical practice, and how does that intellectual struggle that some of us seem to face, even with the smallest of things in their lives, with when we're looking at a text or we're looking at a sigil, how does that enhance the final outcome? That intellectual curiosity to try and decipher what the sigil means, what this cipher means.
I think it plays a huge and significant role because staring at something, even if you're staring at it in frustration, gives you the opportunity to internalize it. And one secret that I think is really significant is that as you memorize, and not maybe explicitly try to memorize, but as you internalize these symbols and images, you start recognizing them in other texts, and you start being able to make these amazing connections between the texts, and it starts giving you non-textual information that you extrapolate from finding it in multiple places. So it does open up a gateway to information, but also, I tell people the most important thing that you put into your magical work, into your spell work, is your effort and your energy. And I think people sometimes don't realize that the effort of decoding a text, of decoding a cipher, of fully understanding what it means, of figuring out what a symbol or a sigil or a seal means, if you decide to go on and use that information in your magical work, you have already imbued that symbol or that information with so much energy as you have worked through the text to understand it. It's preloaded with a lot of your personal energy ready to use for whatever your magical intent is. And I'm fascinated with that idea, and that excites me every time I'm sitting down to decode a text or look at something new. I know that I'm storing up energy for later use and making it symbolically significant to myself for when I use it.
Oh, I love that. Have you ever had the experience of looking at a text, or particularly at sigils and symbols, and then once you actually understand what it means and what the intention was behind it, going out into the world, into the most unexpected of places, and all of a sudden things that you've walked by 100 times. I live in Pennsylvania, so there is so much of that throughout in Philadelphia, in Lancaster, here in Harrisburg, that things that you saw a million times and didn't faze you, maybe from the time you were a kid, suddenly you're like, oh my gosh, there's the symbol there, and there's the symbol there, and it all starts to fall into place that there have been people practically using this magic for since the founding of the country.
Yes, yes. The very first time that happened to me, this is a weird story, but the concept of the yoke, like the yoke to hold two animals, in tarot, Paul Foster Case writes about it a whole lot, and we've been studying a lot of Paul Foster Case and his tarot symbolism, and was really excited about what I was learning. And my partner and I, we went to New Orleans, and we went to Algiers, and we were wandering around Algiers, and we wandered past, I think it was a Masonic building, and there was a bell out in the yard of this building, and that was kind of cool. And then lying there was this yoke, and we both froze and looked at it. I'm like, are we see does that mean, is that really, like, is that the symbol of all, is that indicating all these things that the yoke symbolizes esoterically? And of course it did. I'm like, the masons at this particular lodge, they must be really into some of the esoteric side of masonry. But it was so interesting and exciting to see something that would fly under the radar for most people unless they had been explicitly studying that little section of esotericism and the symbolism of a yoke. So I that made my trip. That was the highlight of the trip.
Yeah, I have fond memories of Algiers and throughout the entire area of New Orleans. It seemed to me, I think that's probably where I first realized that a lot of the symbols I was seeing growing up in Philadelphia were messages hidden in plain sight.
Mm-hmm.
Because there I was in a different culture in New Orleans, and so I was more aware of it. I was looking for it. And then when I came home, I realized, oh my gosh, like places that I've walked past since I was a child have these symbols and messages and reminders, which just for me just invigorates my practice. And so I love that in the book. I also love that you talk about responsible magic. You say that we have to build safeguards and things like for the greater good or the ultimate good of all, or knowing how to undo and reverse a spell before you perform it. I
Yeah.
can't tell you how that I just like yelled when I saw that. Like, yes, why would you do any kind of undertaking, esoteric or not, without being sure that if I mess this up, this is the way to unmess it up?
Right.
It just struck me. And do you think that this cautious, revocable approach is a necessary evolution of magic given the complexities of the modern world of postmodern society? And is it a sign of a magician lacking or is it a sign of a magician lacking the necessary commitment to their will? Because I've had some people like argue with me when I say you better know how to undo what you're doing, because if it doesn't go the way that you think it's going to go, and that's, to me, that's not about doubting your will or
No.
lack of commitment to your will. It's about being ethical and responsible and recognizing that we don't know everything, and that doesn't mean that our will's not being manifest. It just might be that we weren't so clear on what our will actually was until
Ding
it
ding
happens.
ding. Ding ding ding. So how infallible are we? Or are you infallible with your, I try to bring it back to an everyday thing at all times. Do you always make the right choice about everything in your mundane life? And if not, how then do you know you're going to make the right spiritual and magical choices? You don't. And you may live a charmed life where you never make one single esoteric mistake, and that's lovely for you. But I know for me personally, I've made lots of them throughout my life. And knowing how to undo them is a significant part of being able to act with confidence, which is what you need in the midst of the magical act. When the throes of passion, when you are putting all of your effort and energy and intent into a work, you do not need to have a shadow of a doubt about what you're doing. And so everything that you can do in order to reassure yourself consciously and subconsciously that what you're doing is the right thing to do is important. And for me personally, that's knowing how to reverse it, whether
Yeah,
I
I mean,
ever do or not.
a chef doesn't begin to cook with the intention of causing a grease fire, but they almost always have something handy that
Yeah,
if there's a grease fire, they can handle it.
exactly. Exactly.
We have a question here for you, and it is from Carmela Falco, um,
Ooh, how do you
and she
feel?
says, "How do you feel about seances?"
I love seances. I like them. I am fascinated by basically the history of spiritism and spiritualism in general. So as intellectually, I'm fascinated with them, but experientially, I think they're very interesting. And I think that some of the controversy about seances historically also interests me too, like the debunking that Harry Houdini did, because I love stage magicians, and the whole industry that came up to support maybe not so reliable mediums who are using tools to help support them. Um, because what really interests me about them is this idea that when it's this clash of spiritualism and science, in that um, the ability to communicate with the dead has has been tested by science, and sometimes it's come up lacking. And this concept that maybe it comes up lacking because it is such a liminal, strange thing, that that's where the science breaks down, and that therefore science cannot accurately test it. So all of that, when the minute someone says seance, I just light up, because A, I like participating in them and seeing what happens. B, I like them as an intellectual challenge. And C, I like them as this explicit place where it is this meeting, this loggerhead between hard science and spirituality. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to hear about when you mentioned seances, but that's what comes to mind for seances for me.
Well, and it was a great question because it actually ties into where I wanted to go next. I do want to ask you though, mindful of the fact that it's been 30 minutes, and as always, I'm going over. Do you have another 5 or 7, 10
I have
minutes?
all as much time as you need.
Okay, because I'm having too much fun, and I still have so many questions. We're not even halfway through the book. So beyond like the practice of grabbing a book and opening it up to a page and allowing that passage wherever you put your finger to speak to you, like bibliomancy. You talk about textual scrying, and I really lit up when you did that, because that's something that I really enjoy. And for those who aren't familiar with the term, when you say textual scrying, that's looking beyond the words and images on the page. And you say something in that section of the book that I was really fascinated by and hadn't considered before. And that is that you look at the entire page, the text, the symbols, but something that I'd never thought about, you look at the white space too, as a scrying tool, as a scrying mirror, to activate intuition in a way that's really and truly different. And for those who are watching who haven't tried this, that it's another reason to get the book, so that you can try even just this one practice, because it's amazing. And I thought, I was pretty comfortable with textual scrying. And so, I was just reading it excited. And then I saw the part about the white space too. And I was like, oh, I'm setting the book down now, and we have to try this. We have to put this to the test. And it's powerful. It's amazing at how that little shift of focus makes such a big difference. So can you explain this method and how to use, like, because somebody might hear, including the white space, and say, well, how am I supposed to get anything out of that?
So I will say, credit where credit is due. That concept comes from an old Jewish mystical concept about the Kabbalah, and that the letters are sacred, and including the white spaces around the letters are sacred. And so that's what first prompted me to consider the white space. But when we talk about textual scrying, you pick up your favorite book, and this does not have to be an esoteric text. This can be any kind of text, a beloved text. It could be sacred. It could be magical. It could be your favorite novel. It helps if it has images and nifty components on the page. And you hold a question, a concept, a topic in your mind, and you look at the page, but you look at it holistically. You don't try to read, you don't try to absorb specifics. You kind of let your eyes maybe even unfocus a little, and you ruminate and you contemplate, and you scry into the page just like you scry into a crystal. And the concepts may arise internally once you relax your mind with the scrying process, or something may suddenly stand out on the page, or a shape of the blank place may suddenly strike you and remind you of something, and that's how you start to get your answer. And if you have a book that you deeply love, that allows you to scry with a beloved tool, which I think, even though tools aren't necessarily the be all end all, if you really love something and work it into your spiritual practice, you're going to have great results with it.
I want to ask something else about that. So I want to let Spicy know that we're going to get to their question in a second, because I think it's a really great and an important question. And I also want to acknowledge that Carmela mentioned that they're getting ready to do their first seance. So
Oh,
keep us posted on how that goes. But I want to ask a follow-up question to what we were talking about, textual scrying, because you also say in the book that we really you encourage people to stop looking at books as merely being books about magic, as grimoires, as being books about magic, and start looking at them as living magical entities. That reminded me of the concept of the logos being the thing from which we manifest everything, the word and the thought prior to that, and prior to the thought, the wisdom of Sophia. And so for an audience of occultists, what do you think the biggest value of ritualizing our engagement with the grimoire, maybe through a dedicatory reading or something like that? How does that process help transform from an artifact, and an ancient book or even a modern book, into a living spiritual mentor, and working entity in our magical practice, like another member of our spiritual court, if you will?
well, that's a difficult question for me to answer, because I've been so in love with books since such an early age, that it's almost hard to like answer that question, because I'm like, it just happens. But that's not a good answer for an author to give. Um, I think that books are so complex. The simplest book, a kid's nursery rhyme book, so complex, so many different components, from their physicality to the text to the pictures to how they were constructed to what the paper feels like. All of that um, turns each book literally into its own world. Not that the story creates its own world, but the book itself, the physical. This book is its own world. And it's had its own history too. If you pick up a used book, it's been through so much. And I think that if we engage with texts over and over again, and they don't have to be physical texts, some people really like electronic text, and that works great too. Repetition sets up a harmony, a vibration, a resonance that aligns you with the information in the book, that eventually makes the content of the book easier to understand, even though if it's complex content. And that familiarity breeds an emotional connection with what the book contains. And again, it's all about your emotion and your personal, individual, symbolic relationship with the text that is really going to turn your reading and your study into a spiritual practice. So I hope that answered the question, because to me,
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, just read the book and enjoy the book, and magic happens.
I think it really does, because and I also think that you just read the book and magic happens. I think both can be true. But I think, like, I liken it to our personal relationships. We don't your first conversation with somebody doesn't tell you everything about them.
Right, right.
It's not always what the person says. Sometimes it's what they don't say. Sometimes it's just the nuance of that moment, the feeling that you get, the intuition. And for me, as another book nerd, um that's the feeling I get. That's why, for me, an electronic version of a book is never going to be as precious as the physical copy, because there's an energetic imprint that the author leaves on that physical copy. I'm sure there is on the digital copy too. I'm just not as sensitive to that.
Mm-hmm.
But when I hold a book in my hands, you know, there's somebody who it may very well be on our show in the next couple of weeks, whose book really didn't interest me. I thought it was a great topic for a book. Like as another author, I was like, oh, that's a great topic. Yeah, I'll read it and do a review. But when I picked the book up, when the physical copy arrived, there was a relationship that was founded, and I started to read the book, and I was like, wow, it's a good thing that I didn't say to the publicist or whoever it was I was dealing with at the publishing company, I'm going to pass on that one because that's really not an area of my focus. Because when I picked up the book, I realized it was about so much more than the title. Like there was so much more there. And so that question that Spicy Senpai had
Oh,
to ask
okay.
was, how successful do you think someone can be with little or no tools? That's a great question.
100%. 100% successful. You can visualize you can visualize an entire esoteric temple in your head and do all your magic there, and you will be successful because it is about focus and concentration and your will and effort, and less about the accoutrements. I say surrounded by an office full of, I'm a maximalist, surrounded by an office full of stuff, but you don't need the stuff. You can your finger is a great magical wand and you can just go from there. You can do it all internally.
Absolutely. I agree. And one last comment before I ask you our final question. Oh, we got another question that I have to ask too. Um, this question says, everything is a tool, or it's a comment. Everything is a tool in our magic, our thoughts, emotions, and identities. Magic is something you make. Absolutely. And this question that just came in says, is it fair to say that grimoire magic is less of an action that you can do and more of a habit that we cultivate over time? I love that question.
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I'd say it's a bit of both. I think that, you can rip a grimoire off the shelf and grab a symbol and start working with it with it today, which is actually how I partially introduced myself to actually working with grimoire magic. I had a wild idea one day and I started doing it without a lot of thought. And let me tell you, it's a little bit disruptive in my life. So you can do it that way. You can do it without seatbelts. Um, or you can slowly, thoughtfully, carefully approach a particular text and begin to engage with it like you would a friend and like you would getting to know someone, and do it, make it a habit, make it something that you incorporate into your life at a regular basis, and take a slower, more methodical approach to your work. And it truly depends on your personality and your level of curiosity and what you're comfortable with, which one of those approaches will work best.
Absolutely. I have one final question for you, and appreciate you staying long. But authors either love this question or hate this
Oh
question, so
no.
I possibly apologize in advance.
Oh no.
Um, but because authors, particularly when they're humbled, they don't like to be pitching their books. I have so many authors say, just don't talk to me. Just let's not push the book. Let's just talk about the topic. And I think that sells us short, sometimes because I don't always do the best job of remembering, because I can go down a rabbit hole as fast as anyone else, and remembering to keep mentioning that there is a tool here, a book here, which in this case, we've been talking about the entire episode about the importance and value that these tools can have. So, what would you say to a person who may be either a beginner or an advanced esotericist, either way, that you hope they get from your book?
Oh, I hope that they get an open door. I hope they get the invitation to explore a section of their esoteric history that is ours, everyone's by your birthright on this planet, it belongs to you if you reach out and grab it. And I hope that the book is the method by which people can reach out and grab it, even if they think, I'm not an academic, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a reader. It doesn't matter. This book breaks down the other books so that you can start to understand them and start to claim some of that birthright. That is what I hope for.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that your book will absolutely accomplish those goals.
Thank you.
It's really been it's been just a joy to not just be guided through the history of some of these grimoires, but learning how to recognize them as living, working parts of our esoteric practice, and the fact that you encourage us to cultivate a relationship with them is powerful, and goes to what Neo Cicada said in their comment about the a habit that we cultivate over time. So I want to thank you for joining us again, and I'm sure we'll see you again here on the show. Meanwhile, best of luck with the book, and folks who are watching. People who know me know that I have both no filters and I'm a no bullshit kind of guy. So if I don't think that a book is great, you're not going to see it featured on this podcast. So this is another one of those great ones. So I encourage everyone to consider getting it. Is the book out yet, or is it coming out?
It is coming out May of this coming year. So it'll be out. I've been given 2 different dates by my publisher. I'm not sure which one. It's either the 8th or the 18th, but it is available for pre-order, I think, now. So if you want to pre-order and give yourself a future self a gift, you can pre-order.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you, Dee Norman. Thank you, everyone who's watching and who's tuning in. And if you have other questions that might come up, as you're going through this, let us know. And Carmela, I am just absolutely dying to find out if you're related to Edie Falco, because you are just as beautiful as she is. So I just had to ask my question as host prerogative. So you can go ahead and let us know in the comments too, Carmela, if you wish. That just was curious to me because I love Edie Falco. Anyway, thank you, everybody, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our next episode, which, by the way, will be normally these shows are on Sunday. This week is a special week because with the holidays coming up, we wanted to get as much content recorded as we could. So our guest, okay, so Carmela is not. Okay, well, you're still beautiful. This Wednesday, Chris Allen is going to be on to talk to us about his book Whispers from the Coven. So I'm really excited about that. It's a book that I'm not gonna give any spoilers. We'll talk about that on Wednesday, and we'll see everybody then. Thank you so much, Dee. Love ya.
Thank you. Love you too.
Bye.